and he gave me a great educational opportunity myself. And I know, I mean, I would never have made it in neuroscience, by the way. I failed at most things. I didn't finally win into politics, so I'll find in the end. But we could do some neuroscience and politics, certainly go the my way. But I became passionate about education because I believed in social justice, and I think there is no greater opportunity you can give a young person than a decent opportunity for education, and there's no greater injustice than to deprive a young person of a decent start in life through good education. And today, education matters more than ever before. It's always mattered. It's always been great to have knowledge and to expand your horizons and be able to see what's possible for you in the world. But today, for very special reasons, a country's greatest resources is human capital. Globalization and technology are transforming the way the world works. And the chief characteristic of the world we live in today is change. It's the scope, the scale, and the speed of change. So if the world's constantly changing, and people have themselves, communities, and companies, and individuals have to adapt to that change, well, education becomes so much more than simply a liberator of your own mind. It becomes your route to success. It becomes a necessity for you to cope with that scope and scale and speed of change. And what we need today in our education systems, which is why education reform and innovation is so important, which is what the Broad Foundation is dedicated to. The reason it's so important today is education, if you want to be able to survive and prosper in this fast-changing world, has to educate you to innovate. It has to educate you for a future that is going to be very different from the present. And that education has got to make our young people creative. You know, today, education is not just about learning. I mean, you know, when I was at school, we used to learn about all the kings and queens and so on and so forth, which is actually was completely useless to me. Except when you were doing some pub quizzes. But today, education's got to make the mind of the young person creative. It's got to open it to the world and to allow them not just to accumulate knowledge, but teach them how to use that knowledge. Because the knowledge is often there today. I mean, it's there in all sorts of ways that we can derive from the technology, but how you use it is what is important, and how those young people don't just turn up to school, but they come out of school with that creative ability to think new thoughts, to be open to new people, and to be open to new ideas. So what's the challenge for all our education systems? Well, the challenge really is very simple. It's that in this fast-changing world, where people have to adapt to the way the world is shifting, government's not great at change. Mm-hmm. I mean, I always used to say to people that if the first Labour Prime Minister after the war, Clement Attlee, came back to the UK in the early 21st century, he'd think everything had changed about the way we lived in Britain, worked in Britain, the technology, the look of the country, everything about the world would have changed, and then he'd come back into the seat of government and he'd feel completely at home. You know? So the problem is, for those of us who are passionate about education, we need education reform because we need constantly to be changing our education system in order to keep up with the way that the world has changed. And therefore, this issue to do with the public school system and how it manages to adapt and provide great education for the future, that is literally the central question for all governments who want their countries to be prosperous and successful in the future. And the interesting thing is, we know what works. It's not actually a mystery as to what creates a good school. A strong sense of ethos, good leadership, inspirational teaching, disciplined environment, teaching staff that feels both valued but also able to bring the best out of their pupils and their students. These are the things we know make a good school. The purpose of what we're engaged in today, whether Eli with his foundation, or the people here from the public school system, or those of us in government, what we're trying to do is to take those basic, simple lessons and create a system in which all schools are able to provide those types of opportunities for their children. Now, there are certain principles that I think are necessary to do that. The first is, and I used to have this debate many, many times when I was Prime Minister of the country, I refuse to believe that just because people come from a poor neighborhood doesn't mean to say they can't get a great education. They should be able to get a great education, whatever background they come from, whatever their color, whatever their faith, whatever their culture. And that basic principle, that we do not tolerate the idea that failure is inevitable, is a vital part of creating an education system for the future. The second thing is that we need to give those who are innovating and behaving creatively within our education system the chance to make the changes that they need to make. So, I always used to say, there are great interests within our education system, whether bureaucracy or unions or anything else, and it's important to work with them. But nothing and no interest should ever stand in the way of high-quality education for our young people. So, whenever there is resistance to that change, it's important we overcome it. And I learned something about reform in the time that I was Prime Minister. And Eli was talking about some of the things we did. But I remember when we first came to office, London had some of the worst school results in the country. And over a period of the 10 years that I was in office, we systematically changed at every level the way the school system worked. And recently there was a report indicating that the improvement in London schools have been the most significant in our education system ever since the beginning of public education. But we did it, I'm afraid, by a lot of hard work, a lot of focus, and we did it by refusing to accept that the system should stay as it was if it wasn't delivering for our young people. And I learned something about reform as I went along. And it was never easy, by the way. When you first propose change, and I think this is true if you're in a position of leadership in any organization, when you first propose change, people resist it. When you're doing it, it's hell. And after you finish doing it, you wish you'd done more of it. And I felt that about school reform as well. And one of the great things is, after I left office, actually even successor government has taken those reforms on and deepened them. And our education system is improving steadily, not nearly as fast as we want to see, but it is. But it only happened because people were determined that it did happen. And I know one place in London